For the first time, there is a crack in the Donald Trump campaign armor. Ted Cruz is on a roll. Marco Rubio is on the verge of losing his status as the butt of punchlines. The GOP is doing its level best to avoid using the phrase brokered convention. The time has come to embrace the chaos. American Muslims want every one of us to embrace the phrase patriotic American Muslims. Is that even possible? And what of a new poll revealing a shocker about which Republican candidate is the choice among Muslim Americans? The backbone of a thriving American economy is small business, and the time is here for those owners and workers to hear the truth about which candidate would be a benefit or a boondoggle to their futures. She was a true lady who always looked to the future of her country and her man. Yet as we recall Nancy Reagan, the time is now to correct those who use her passing as a way to hammer at the failed war on drugs. That's my commentary tonight and telling it like it is. I'm Ed Berliner, and this is The Hardline for Monday, March 7th, 2016.
Marco Rubio had a very, very bad night, and personally, I'd call for him to drop out of the race. I think it's time now that he drop out of the race. I really think so.
You know how when you're in elementary school and you get graded on how you get along with people, and there's that one line, plays well with others? I mean, really, you just want to pull your hair out when you see that insult fest that goes on among the Republicans.
Donald Trump says he wants Ted Cruz one-on-one. Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton already there, and the sparks are truly beginning to fly. The Republicans are trying to tamp down ideas. They want Trump out, though their actions are obvious. And despite the obvious flaring of emotions on the left, is there a chance these two will join hands and create what some believe would be an unbeatable November ticket? We're on the case with the senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, columnist at the National Review, and a former speechwriter for Nancy Reagan, which will come into play during this conversation, Mona Charen, joined by the former Democratic senatorial aide and contributor at The Hill, one of the few from the left who is actually able to see light from the right, though it's usually a pinpoint to begin with, Brent Budowsky. I want to thank you both for joining us. Mona, I'm going to go ahead and begin with you. Interesting, here comes the headline up this morning. The GOP establishment now faces its nightmare scenario, Trump versus Cruz, especially after what happened this weekend. You believe in this being a nightmare scenario?
No. I think the only, I hate that term establishment. I refuse to use it. It has become meaningless. It's just thrown around like an epithet. Whoever you don't like, that's the establishment. But I, from my perspective, there is only one nightmare for anyone, Republican, Democrat, Independent, and that nightmare is called Donald Trump. Donald Trump getting anywhere near power. That's the nightmare. Everybody else is fine.
Then let's go back to your words about establishment here, because frankly, there's a lot of people who agree with you that this is being thrown around and most people have no idea what it means. It's become a catchphrase right now and a cliche more than anything else. Okay, let's take that as fact. So how then do you fight it if you're Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio, but mostly Ted Cruz right now, that he's nothing more than an establishment guy and needs to go?
Sorry, Ted Cruz is being accused of being establishment?
Ah, there you go.
All right. So look, both Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio were Tea Party favorites who came to power against the establishment, if you want to call it that. And again, hate that term, but more experienced politicians in their states, let's put it that way. And in the case of Rubio, it was against Charlie Crist, who then eventually was unmasked as a really kind of fake Republican. He eventually did decamp to the Democratic Party. But the notion that either one of these guys is establishment, again, ridiculous use of terminology. I reject it utterly.
Brent, let me get to you on this, because when that term is used, I hear from a lot of people when they use it. And that's why I included Ted Cruz in this. People say, they've been in Washington for years. That's the establishment. They know all the crooks. Matter of fact, they're one of the crooks in there. That's usually what I hear from people. Do we need to stop using that and basically just bring some common sense to this argument instead of just throwing that word around constantly?
Well, I think the word is overused. I use it myself in a slightly different way. The only establishment candidate in the Republican Party, if the word means anything, was Jeb Bush. Beyond that, the others were insurgents of different kinds. I think the problem is there is throughout America, throughout the Republican Party and many places in the Democratic Party and political independence, a backlash and outrage against many things, Washington, about the way the parties, capital T, capital P, are running business in Washington. And I think what you're getting with Trump is a vote against that. I think what you're getting with Bernie is a vote against that. And if the entire Democratic, I hate to say it, establishment wasn't united almost unanimously for Hillary and against Bernie, that race would be even closer than it is now. But it's a general national feeling that people in Washington in both parties, in Congress and the White House, don't understand what they are worried about with the economy, the anxiety, the fear of terror. And they think it's all, with some justice in my view, a pretty corrupt town. So I think that kind of a description is more accurate in what people are thinking and why they're voting as they are than the establishment. It's a word with some meaning, but when you use it too much, it loses the meaning.
I got to tell you, somebody this weekend said to me that Ted Cruz was part of the establishment. I turned to him and I said, I think you need another cocktail. You mentioned Bernie Sanders. Let me go ahead and get to that, because the Democratic debates, let's be honest here, Brent, they tend to be more subdued than the GOP. But Bernie Sanders was a lot more aggressive last night. Here's one of the moments that everybody's talking about.
If you are talking about the Wall Street bailout, where some of your friends destroyed this economy, excuse me, I'm talking.
Let him sprung.
I gotta love it. I hearken right back to my grandfather. Excuse me, young man, I'm talking. So let's get to this, Brent. Did Bernie make any points? Because if you read, some people say he's absolutely out of it. Hillary Clinton can't be overcome. But wait a minute, he did so well last night. He's still in there fighting.
Oh, he's absolutely in there fighting. If it weren't for the superdelegates monopoly that the Democrats have, where almost all 400, some of them, are all going in the same way, the media would be correctly playing this as a much closer race. Now, my view happens to be that there is more of a progressive populist majority in America than any other viewpoint, including what people might call Hillary's crony capitalism, or whatever you call Donald Trump, or traditional conservatives. Now, Mona and I could probably have a great debate about that when we have more time, but I think Bernie speaks for a lot of people. Yeah, Bernie speaks for a lot of people. Yeah, and I think he will be alive as long as he wants to. The astounding thing, okay, is the degree of people giving a ton of money to Bernie, small donors, 42 million. He beat Hillary by more than $10 million in the last month, and he beat Hillary the month before by a significant amount. It is astounding that an underdog candidate with no organized party support from, quote, the establishment, unquote, he's still outraising Hillary Clinton, who's the candidate of the Wall Street speeches. It's amazing.
Mona, I'll tell you what, you got to look at it from this perspective at least. On the right, people look at Donald Trump, he's a showman. Wait a minute, I'm going to call Bernie a little bit of a showman himself. He's in there right now. He understands what it is. There's Hillary Clinton, that stoic visage, if you will. Nobody trusts her. And Bernie's out there, he's acting like everybody's grandfather. They love him for it.
Well, let's talk about the point that Brent made, though. I want to clarify why I agree that there is probably a majority in this country for sort of a leftist and progressive view of what government should be doing. You could say that when you look at the way Hillary Clinton has had to move left to gain some of the enthusiasm of the Bernie Sanders supporters, and that Bernie Sanders is a socialist, who wants a huge, we already have an enormous state. He wants to make it even bigger and more oppressive, but also more redistributionist, take more of other people's property and give it to the people that you prefer. But there's a similar movement going on in the Republican Party, and you see that with Trump's success. After all, Trump is pretty much of a mainstream Democrat in the policies that he promotes. He's not in favor of touching any entitlement or reforming them in any way. He's pro-Planned Parenthood. He's pretty much your mainstream Democrat, and he is getting a plurality of what we thought were mostly conservatives in the Republican Party. Of course, he's gotten quite a few Democrats and independents too.
Okay.
And he's done worse in those primaries that are closed to just Republicans. But still,
I'm going to leave that for another time, because we need to really have the two of you back and discuss just that. But I only got 2 minutes left, and I do want to mention, Mona, as I talked about here at the top, you were a speechwriter for Nancy Reagan. The First Lady passed this weekend. Your memories of Nancy Reagan?
An unbelievably gracious lady, and it's very well worth pausing in our very vulgar and crude time that we're living through now to remember what graciousness actually looked like. That she was always dignified in public and in private, that she was devoted to her husband Michael Deaver said that Reagan would not have been governor and he wouldn't have been president if there had not been Nancy Reagan by his side, and I completely agree with that. She was a huge source of stability and strength in his life. They were crazy about each other. They didn't, even when they were alone in the White House, they were always in the same room. That was just the way they were. They were an incredible union and support system for one another. It was a great marriage, and she was a very, very wonderful first lady, devoted herself to the anti-drug movement and really conducted herself with great dignity.
Brent, I got about 60 seconds left. Is it fair to say that politicians and people on the left had the same feeling for Nancy Reagan, that they respected her so much?
I think many of them do, and I certainly do. And I would agree with every single word that Mona just said, and I'll add one additional thing. When Nancy Reagan was First Lady, and Mona was working for her, I was working for Democratic leadership in the House, Tip O'Neill, Jim Wright, etc. And I had many relationships, open and some back channel, including one to Nancy Reagan through a third and fourth party. The world owes Nancy Reagan a debt of gratitude and thanks and honor for the contribution she made to our country and the world in the days that Reagan was dealing with Gorbachev. I hope someday the full story will come out. She was a wonderful lady, one of the best first ladies in American history. May she rest in peace and bless her heart.
I smell an absolutely great story one day. I think you're exactly right. Tell that story and tell it in detail that Americans don't know about. She truly was not just First Lady, she was so much more. Brent Budowsky, Mona Charen, I want to thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you both soon. Now, 3 words that many Americans find it simply impossible to put into the same sentence. One man is trying to change all that. We'll do that next, right here on The Hardline.